Decisions Legal Minute podcast. And today we're going to talk about a sentence that's so simple that most people will miss the violence hidden inside of it. You can't wake a person pretending to be asleep. Sit with that. Not a person who is asleep, not a person who is tired, not a person who is confused. A person pretending to be asleep. Now, when we're talking about this, sleep is innocent. Pretending is a decision. Sleep is a condition. Pretending is a strategy. And that sentence is going to explain more about modern America than most law school case books will ever do. It explains why people defend misconduct they never witnessed, use a badge before they will question a lie. It explains why constitutional violations that are caught on video in black and white, under oath, under statute, under precedent, and still some people will say, well, we don't know the whole story. No, that's not cautious. That's not wisdom. That's not balance. That's theater. And today's episode, I'm speaking directly to blissful ignorance of the police apologists. Because the stage is crowded with those people who would rather protect an illusion than confront a fact. Because once you admit that authority can be reckless just because they're wearing a uniform, they can be dishonest, they can be violent, they can be indifferent, incompetent, or they're protected by a system built on excuses. Especially when the whole story changes. Because then you have to ask harder questions. Questions about courts, questions about prosecutors, questions about police unions, questions about qualified immunity, questions about your own existence, even questioning your own instincts. Question about why you trusted power simply because it wore a uniform and carried itself with confidence. When you start asking these questions, these statements begin to cut deep. Because it's not about sleep, it's about consent. I had a friend of mine that I spoke with yesterday. I generally speak to him daily. And one of the things he brought up yesterday, and I was just an idle conversation. He said, back the blue until it happens to you. And that is a profound statement simply because I've watched it happen time and time and time and time and time again. You had a CW, the CW, they have this series called Police 24/7. And I literally just did a story where they had on video where this young lady got a call from dispatch. You can hear the dispatch call on the show. Once the dispatch call was over, she immediately turns to the camera and begins to lie. She supports the lie on 3 separate occasions. She even, when a second officer appears on the scene, she then creates a secondary lie when she was there for a welfare check. She created a crime for someone who needed a medical emergency. She was there for one thing. She lied about what she was told. She then told someone else to lie. And instead of helping someone, she created a crime. And when we talk about that, it's about people that are consenting to delusion because truth is too expensive. The truth costs comfort. The truth costs tribal loyalty. The truth costs simple narratives. And most people would rather pay with someone else's rights than to act with their own certainty. So today we're going to break down the only way I know how to do it. We're going to examine the psychology of it. We're going to examine the law. We're going to examine a few cases. We're going to examine the culture of cowardice. Yes, we're going to examine the culture of cowardice that allows unconstitutional conduct to be dressed up as public safety. And by the time this episode ends, you're going to understand exactly why blissful ignorance is harmful. Now, it's not passive, it's not neutral, it's not uninformed. It's an operating system because it's a choice and a chosen way of living. And when enough people install it into their minds, rights become optional, abuse becomes explainable, and victims become inconveniences. So let's get into it. What the title actually means. You can't wake a person pretending to be asleep. The quote is profound because it identifies a problem that logic cannot solve. I'm going to say that one more time. You can't wake a person pretending to be asleep. The quote is profound because it identifies a problem that logic can't solve. Because if someone is honestly asleep, you can wake them. Shake them, call their name, turn on the lights, pull back the curtain. But if someone is pretending, the problem isn't lack of information. The problem is active resistance. That matters because in law, politics, media, policing, and everyday life, a huge percentage of bad outcomes are caused by lack of access to facts. They are caused by deliberate refusal to follow facts that they were led. People who do not want evidence, they want permission. They want permission to belong. Because their permission believes authority is automatic. Force is automatically justified. Accusations are automatically proof. And the person on the receiving end of state violence must have done something wrong. That is a mental defect. That's lazy. That's dangerous. And it's socially rewarded. Because once a person identifies emotionally with power, they start filtering reality to preservation of power. Not truth, not fairness, not constitutional structure, and not law. I just want to make sure you catch it. Not law. Because pretending to be asleep means a deliberate and conscious choice. If you admit the officer lied, then you have to stop saying back to blue, like it's a substitute for analysis. If you admit the search was unlawful, then you have to care about the Fourth Amendment even if the defendant is not sympathetic. Even if the defendant's a complete butthole, you have to then still look at it. If you admit the use of force was excessive, then you have to accept that danger is not a universal excuse. If you admit the court sometimes shield obvious misconduct, then you have to face the gap between constitutional language and constitutional enforcement. And many people do not want that burden. They want emotional simplicity, good guys, bad guys, uniform equals good, citizen complaint equal excuses, case closed. And that's why the quote resonates. It's not a quote about ignorance. It's a quote about chosen ignorance. And chosen ignorance is far more destructive than ordinary confusion. Because why do people defend institutions they do not know? Let's get a little surgical. Why do people become police apologists for officers they've never met? Because many people, the police are not just employees of the state, they are symbols. And once a symbol gets involved, reason starts losing ground. Police symbolize order. Police symbolize protection. Police symbolize the promise that somebody is in charge when things fall apart. That's what we are taught policing actually means. So when someone criticizes police misconduct, many listeners do not hear a narrow complaint about one unconstitutional stop, one unlawful search, one false report, one bad shooting, one planted case, one retaliation arrest. They hear a threat to their emotional structure. Because we're in a new age of sensitivity. And when you have something that's tearing at the fabric of your very being, it becomes painful. Because now you have to reconstruct this in order to accept that. And people rather stay ignorant here. They don't want to continue learning. They don't want new information. They want to bask in their bliss of ignorance. Because again, they don't want to pay the cost that to actually get to where it's necessary to not only have the information to make an informed decision, an educated decision. That's, you know what? Let me go back to my notes because let me stay on point because I got a little emotionally involved in this one. But I want you to hear this. If this institution is flawed, then maybe I am less safe than I thought. If this officer lied, then maybe I trusted the wrong person. If courts excuse this conduct, then maybe law is not self-executing. If abuse can happen to people who did nothing wrong, maybe it can happen to me. Because this is why I brought up the statement earlier. The conversation when we had it, back to blue until it happens to you. If you actually been following me for a while, I did a podcast probably about 2 years ago. A friend of mine, she was back to blue until she was blue in the face. Until she had a restraining order against her boyfriend. The boyfriend then lied to the police, and because she had blocked him, was like, hey, I can't get in contact with her. We need to do a wellness check. And he went with the police to do a wellness check on her, even though he had a restraining order on her, on him from her. He then goes in the house, and as he goes in the house, he tells them, hey, she sleeps with the gun. They go into the house, now they're scared. They go into the house and they shoot her because she don't even know they're in the house because she sleeps with her headphones on. Well, she used to sleep with her headphones on. She sees a strange man in her bedroom. She lives by herself. She reaches for a gun, police shoot her. Now they didn't bother to do any work. And here's the greater part about that. They're not obligated to. But she is no longer back to blue because now she has new information. She was a person who did nothing wrong, followed the law up to the T. They did her wrong. She now has a new reality. Because if it can happen to her, when she's following the law, what makes it okay when it happens to someone else? Because even in those contexts, initially, the defense mechanisms kicked in. Denial. She minimized it. She rationalized it. She then started blaming herself. And then she inflated the context of it. But when she started actually asking herself questions, listen carefully to it. We don't know everything. That's the reason why you have the totality of circumstances. The job is dangerous, but it's not in the top 30. An Uber driver, it has a more dangerous job than a police officer. Hell, a convenience store clerk has a more dangerous job than a police officer. Are you telling the convenience store clerk, thank you for your service? Are you worrying about how dangerous that job is? Because they're not getting 6 figures for working at the convenience store. They have to make split-second decisions, which is now why Barnes v. Felix goes into effect for everything. Why? Because those split-second decisions are no longer optional. He should have complied. Florida v. Royer says, I don't have to participate. The Fifth Amendment says I can shut up if I have the ability. She should have called differently. Aren't you trained in de-escalation? They were just doing their jobs. Why weren't they doing it correctly? See how all these things, these excuses, have legal backing that contradicts it directly. This is what I do to take away those arguments. This is what I do to take away those shields. The shields against cognitive dissonance. Because once facts collide with identity, many people choose identity. That's where the real battle comes in, because it's more here than it is anywhere else. Not facts versus lies, because the harder fact is versus identity protective reasoning. And that's why people remain unreachable until the machine touches them personally. You don't need to argue with anyone to convince them. All you can do is just lay it out for them, because they're going to back the blue until it happens to you. That is the thing that they're going to go. Because, again, in order for them to change their mind and look at them as humans, this has to change first. And the willfulness to stay asleep or pretend to be, the blissful ignorance they're willing to bask in, is more comfortable than having your mindset completely changed. Because until their house is entered, their child is charged, their car is searched, their loved one is mishandled, their complaint is ignored, their safety is deprived, their rights are treated like obstacles, then suddenly the abstract becomes real. They are awake, not because the facts changed, because proximity changed. Now, the law does not assume officers are always right. Let's understand that. The law does not always assume officers are right. And this part matters. A lot of public rhetoric treats police judgment as it is almost sacred. But American law does not actually say that police officers are always right, and it's far from it. And Malley v. Briggs, I speak about this constantly. The United States Supreme Court rejected the idea that officers get blanket protection whenever they invoke official duty. The court said qualified immunity protects all but the plainly incompetent. Let me say that one more time. The court says qualified, maybe I need to figure out how to say it. The court says qualified immunity protects all but the plainly incompetent or those who knowingly violate the law. Remember I told you it's two ways, I've been saying this for years, two ways to lose qualified immunity. Through ignorance or willful acts. And here's the great part about it. You can ask a police officer about Terryville, Ohio. They can't tell you that it's 7 parts that they must follow. You can ask a police officer about a show of authority stop. They'll have no idea that it comes from Terryville, Ohio, or what it is. Because a show of authority stop is in direct contradiction to their training. I'm going to say that one more time. A show of authority stop is in direct contradiction to their training. Because if an officer gives you instructions, absent a crime, it is a violation of their oath. It is a violation of Terryville, Ohio. This is where they lose the qualified immunity. Why? Because it's plainly incompetent. They don't even know that they're not supposed to do it. Why? Because they are trained to do it. They are not trained that they are servants, and they must be amenable at all times. And I actually read that in the state's constitution, which they swore to uphold and defend, which 90% of those people have never read. Actually, let's go 99%. I'm pretty confident in that. But understand, there are very few police officers that have read their state's constitution that they swore to uphold and defend. And it states in the executive or governmental sector, amenable to the people at all times. This is why they are public servants. And when they sign that fiduciary note, which is their oath, there's a breach of duty, because that is evidence that they have a duty to you. When they breach that, you can then hold them responsible for it. But most of them don't know that. And that matters because the doctrine itself assumes something many apologists refuse to admit. Some officers are objectively unreasonable, and some abuses are legally actionable. I'm going to say that one more time. That matters because the doctrine itself assumes something many apologists refuse to admit. Some officers are objectively unreasonable, and some abuses are legally actionable. Just like, what was his name? Sandra Massey. One officer shot, the other looked at like, what are you doing? That officer went to prison for 20 years. But you had all these police apologists running out, oh, well, he acted right because she could have possibly might have done. She didn't. That's the whole thing, she didn't. But you were so quick to apologize for him and saying what he did was wrong what he did was right because he could have possibly might have. When in fact, he broke the law when he actually did what he did to this woman. And the whole simple fact of this, the case should force a mental reset because the Supreme Court can recognize plainly incompetent policing, then ordinary citizens do not need to act shocked when communities point it out. I'm going to say that one more time. If the Supreme Court can recognize plainly incompetent policing, you as an ordinary person shouldn't be shocked when someone points out plainly incompetent policing. And let's be precise. The Constitution question is not, do the police have a hard job? Construction workers have a hard job. The question is, did the state, through this officer, violate a constitutional limit? Because that is what the Constitution is. A book of restrictions on the government, period. It's not a book of rights, not a Bill of Rights. It is a book of restrictions on the government. And when you ask the proper question, that is a completely different inquiry. And one of the books I'm going to recommend today is Tony Robbins, Ask Better Questions. If you're looking for absolute growth in your life, ask better questions. Because if you're just accepting everything someone says, you are blissfully ignorant. You are someone who's pretending to be asleep. Now, let me get back to it. A hard job does not erase the Fourth Amendment. A dangerous profession does not suspend probable cause. Stress does not create consent. Fear does not manufacture reasonable suspicion. Training does not legalize perjury. Uniforms do not disinfect misconduct. That is the whole point of constitutional law. Government power is always sold as necessary. The Constitution exists to ask whether it was lawful. Why? Because it's the supreme law of the land. Supreme is the top. And yes, you're welcome. So the public responds to every criticism of police conduct with, well, that's a dangerous job. They're answering the wrong question. Danger explains stress. It does not provide legality. The distinction is everything. Because again, an Uber driver has a more dangerous job than a police officer. A convenience store worker has a more dangerous job than a police officer. As a matter of fact, I'm actually going to give you a story. I've actually given this story once before, and it was one of the most beautiful things that I'd ever seen in my life, and I almost wish I could go back to it. And it was literally 5 years ago. My son at the time he was 10. He had come down to El Paso with me for the summer. We were flying back, and we ended up stopping in Dallas. It had a long layover because I'm cheap. Get over it. During that, we went to a park in Dallas, not too far from the airport, and we were kind of looking around and getting something to eat. And I start having a conversation with a police officer, and one of the things the police officer says was, well, you got to understand that the job is dangerous. My 10-year-old son, without me prompting him, leans over and goes, well, does the window washer have a more dangerous job? How about the pilot of the plane we're getting ready to get on? And he just rattles off, as a 10-year-old, things that he sees that are more dangerous than policing, which then lets you not understand they're parrots. They're just parroting things that they've heard. They're parroting things that people have no idea what they're doing or saying, not in actuality. Because most of the danger that is in policing is due for actions that are outside of police boundaries. And yes, I said it, because that was even, again, the CW pulling up police 24/7. If you watch the show, and it's a comical show, because they tell you on the show that they police in low-income areas, and they do it unconsciously. Why? Because that is a part of the police training. The war is on the poor. They openly tell you this. They show it to you because they're not in high-income areas when they're doing this. They're policing where there's no chance of them being held accountable. Two, they'll also show you that they'll create a crime. Oh, this person looks like that. I'll pull him over just to see. That's not probable cause. And then they'll constantly lie to someone. And if that person defends themselves, they immediately go into intimidation tactics and then violation of rights. And it's funny because I'll watch it and I'll put the comments down there, because it was one of the things that have been brought to my attention, because it's easy for me to say, you know what, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. But when I can actually show you on every episode that this is a bad policing situation. And again, just like I talked about the other young lady who got a call on dispatch, which we watched and heard, she immediately began lying. She lied on 3 separate occasions about one call. And then she created a crime where there was none. And the simple fact is, that is policing in America. That is what makes the job dangerous. When you're pulling someone over just because, when you're taught to profile someone, when you're going only in areas where there's a less likelihood of being held accountable for your wrong actions. Not because you're doing your job properly, because you're doing it improperly, willfully. Because that is what they call an acknowledgement of guilt. That's why whenever I put these things up, I'm not putting them out just to be said. It's so I can wake you up, because when you want to stop pretending to be asleep, you then have the information that doesn't directly come from me. It comes through me, because I'm giving it something that the other people won't, and that's giving you eyes on it. Because even the one thing that I love, and I'm going to get back on track, is the fact that I do a series called Bad Cops. People always talk about how bad these police officers are, but they are all my lowest viewed videos. Why? Because no one actually cares. It just sounds good. They are my lowest viewed videos, but people complain about the policing constantly. But they'll tell you that's what they want. They'll tell you they wish they could see that. They even tell me, I wish you do more of them. But all of them are my lowest viewed videos. I think I've only had 3. I put up more than 100. I think I've only had 3 that has gotten more than a few hundred views. So just let that sink in. Because people are even afraid to watch the videos of bad officers that are doing things that are outside of policing. Whenever I say certain things, it's still disregarded, because again, even if you say you're woke, you still have to wake this up. You have to willfully want something changed. To change that, you have to pay a price. And 99.9% of people are not willing to pay the price to wake up. Now, the dangerous job excuse needs precision. So now let's address that one, because the most abused talking point in modern discussion. Policing is one of the most dangerous jobs in America. That statement is directly true in the sense that policing can be dangerous, but it's often used in a misleading manner. Current BLS fatal work injury data shows policing not in the top 10 deadliest occupations by workplace facility rate. Occupations like logging, fishing, the thing that your uncle do every Saturday. Fishing is more dangerous than policing. Roofing, construction, trucking, the big 18-wheelers, more dangerous than policing. Collections, aviation. Remember my son said the pilot? Uber, Lyft, convenience store. I want you to understand something. Police officers show a rate of 0.07% And that's from the 2024 rate charts. 0.077, less than 1%. Yeah, I let you digest with that. Because when I talk about fishing is more dangerous than policing, why you not hugging your uncle every time he walk back in the door from, going to get some catfish down at the lake? Why we not doing that? Because hell, I know dudes on the oil rig right now, more dangerous than policing. And all they're doing is pumping oil. But we minimize that and we elevate something to someone who is supposed to be a servant and made a conscious choice to sign a document saying that they're going to do something for pay. Willfully, without any consultation from you or me, they chose to do it, but then they want an understanding of how they do it wrong. Because I want you to understand what I'm saying. And I also want you to understand what I'm not saying. I'm not saying policing is safe. I'm not saying that. I am saying danger is constantly used as rhetoric to dissolve scrutiny. The claim is not usually made to inform. It's used to immunize. It is used to turn criticism into disrespect. It's used to convert legal analysis into emotional betrayal. It's used to frame accountability as ignorance by the public. It's a point of manipulation. It's not an actuality. Because in a dangerous job, you're not entitled to ignore law. You're not entitled to convert every citizen encountered into a presumption of guilt. You're not entitled to fabricate reports understandably. You're not justified in unconstitutional shortcuts. So the next time someone say policing is dangerous, the proper response is that may be true. Now show me how the Constitution created a danger exception for unlawful conduct. Don't worry, I'll wait. And for those that need to write this down, your response is, that may be true. Now show me where the Constitution created a danger exception for unlawful conduct. And even a young man I watch often, he was a former Homeland Security agent, which he equates to being a police officer. He spoke about the use of force. He spoke about not using the background of an officer. He misused Tennessee v. Gardner and Graham v. Connor. He then used a police officer's background to excuse an action that he then later misused Tennessee v. Gardner and Graham v. Connor again. Because most of them use it to manipulate and to justify unlawful conduct. Because at the end of the day, if you're signing any contract and you don't read the contract and you don't understand the execution of the contract, you shouldn't be involved in the contract. And then if you are and you miss all that, you don't read, you don't give it, you don't care, you just roll, you then can't cry about the consequences of the contract when someone's holding you accountable for it. Now, I actually did another one, Buffalo, the Buffalo culture in plain sight. Buffalo, 2020, 2 Buffalo officers shoved 75-year-old Martin Gugino during a protest. He fell backwards, hit his head, and suffered serious injury. Then, 57 officers resigned from the emergency response team in the aftermath of the suspension of these officers. Why did I bring that up? Because that episode exposed something deeper than one shove. It exposed solidarity culture. Back to blue. The culture where protecting the group can become more urgent than confronting what the group did. 57 officers supported pushing a peaceful protester, which is allowed by the Constitution that all 57 of them swore to uphold and defend. But because they were held accountable for unlawful actions, all 57 then resigned. Yes, I pause for dramatic effect because I want you to understand something. Because when you have that type of mindset, that type of mentality, you're not there for the people. So then when the people hold you accountable, you shouldn't be upset with it because you're not there for them. You're not there to do the job properly. Why? Because I'm not listening to your words. I'm watching your actions. Your actions say you're not there for the people. Your actions are saying you're not there to follow law. Your actions are saying we should be able to do whatever we want to do without being held accountable. And since we're being held accountable for the contract that we willfully signed, we did not read, we did not understand. Let me go because if I go too deep and wake you up, you might not even like me anymore. I get it. I understand that. And because most people are not even going to understand why that's dangerous. Because it's institutional tribalism. If the emotional reflex of dozens of officers to rally around colleagues after a widely seen act of force against an elderly man, then the problem is not one bad decision in one bad moment. The problem is they normalized violating the rights of the people that they swore to defend and uphold. It tells the public, we'll protect our own before we protect you. That's what destroys the trust. Not criticism, not lawsuits, not viral videos, their actions. Because legitimacy depends on the belief that institutions can correct themselves when they cross the line. When you have a refusal to correct yourself when you're doing wrong, that is a show that you do not care, and it is a form of manipulation. And when the public sees internal solidarity operating faster than moral clarity, they learn an ugly lesson. The institution may fear embarrassment more than injustice. Say that one more time, because thank you, plain. The institution may fear embarrassment more than injustice. That is exactly how blissful ignorance becomes institutional. Not only do citizens look away, the organization looks away too. Because even then, I actually did this because this is the Officer Pringle podcast that I did. Go look it up. Go listen to it because I got deeper into this aspect. But I brought these up because I want you to understand the iconic aspirations and actions that led up to blissful ignorance. Because what happened when the accountability feels like betrayal in Atlanta? Because that's my spot. Forever I love Atlanta. A-town up, or peace up, A-town down. Anyway. During 2020, again, officers forcibly removed Tania Pilgrim and Messiah Young from a car trapped in traffic. Now, I'm gonna give you a little backstory before I go deeper into that. This is when the world shut down. It was literally abrupt. People were still in school. They went out to get food. And again, if you know the AU Center, it's a big loop. It is literally in the middle of everything. Right? It's only a couple streets, but it's in the middle. Instant curfew, hit everybody's phone. Get back. Go lockdown. That's what we're doing. Now, in the midst of doing that, now we created a massive traffic jam at the AU Center. So while they're sitting in traffic, they're on their phone. They see the police interacting with a man that's walking. During that interaction, they start recording. In the midst of that recording, police officers then converge on the car. Now, the video showed officers breaking the window and using tasers. Multiple officers later were charged. But what they didn't say was, Tanea arm was broken. Messiah's nose was broken. You know what they didn't say? The crime they committed, which was being stuck in traffic and watching police officers abuse a citizen. That's what their crime was. Because after that, there was a second incident. Young man fell asleep in the Wendy's drive-thru. He was in the car, wasn't driving. He fell asleep. And his name was Rashad Brooks. Officer, I should have put the officer's name in this one. Officer then woke up Rashad, pulled his car out of the drive-thru. Officer then escalated the stop. Because again, Rashad's not driving, he's out of the car, not on the road. And I believe his partner had Rashad's keys, Rashad Brooks. Officer then, during the escalation, because most people don't know this, if an officer attempts to effect an unlawful arrest in Georgia, it is codified that as the person being unlawfully arrested, I can return equal force. Rashad Brooks returned equal force. That officer, when reaching for his taser, Rashad got to it first. That officer then grabbed a gun and proceeded to shoot Rashad in the back. Now, he then said, okay, well, I shouldn't have been fired, even though he did everything procedurally wrong. He then comes back within a week. He's involved in another officer-involved shooting. He had only been back a week. But the reason why I brought that up was because he had a pattern of behavior. You know, things that they say about criminals, a pattern of behavior. Because again, I've even used that as a weapon to stop searches because I've never consented. In my entire life, I have never consented to a search. I have never consented to a pat down. So if the officer attempts to say, oh, I had consent, what made you special? Because my pattern of behavior has never been to consent. I've never actually I did accept a plea one time because it was, I spent more money to get down to the little hick ass town. And I think the young lady who tried to dox me and pulled that up and showed that I did I did lie. It was $15 and I had spent $30 in gas to get there. So she did show I lied and I took that one plea. I apologize. But I don't care if you got me on videotape with my social security number tattooed on my ass. I'm going to trial. I'm cranking it up. I had fun during my RICO trial picking voir dire. I enjoyed it. But understand, pattern of behavior is not utilization against you. It's something that you can use against them as well. But I brought that up because even though this officer who had a pattern of unlawful behavior, they brought him back. But during that, the Atlanta Police Department, Fulton County, experienced the blue flu. Sick out involving 170 officers. Those were related in atmosphere, but are not the same incident, and the accuracy matters on that. You had 57 that quit in Buffalo or resigned in Buffalo because 2 officers violated the constitutional rights of a protester, injured him seriously, and because they were held accountable, 57 resigned. You had, I believe it was 6 officers in the Tania Pilgrim and Messiah Young case, where they actually violently broke the windows and injured these children. Because yes, if we want to call, they were 19, I think 18, 19 years old. They were children going to school, not breaking the law, broken arm, broken nose. Oh, well, we got to be held accountable for that. 170 said, you know what, I'm just not going to go to work. Because if you watch the video or listen to the podcast, one of the things I say is I talked to one of my partners who was a cop at the time, who also sat out on the blue flu. What he said was we're being punished for doing the job the way we were trained to do it. We're just doing what we're trained to do. They're trained to escalate. They're trained to be violent. They're trained to not follow the Constitution that they swore to uphold. They're trained to do it. So whenever someone calls that out to a police apologist, that's just wrong because they have a duty. But then you excuse that action until it happens to you. Because I want you to understand, the reason why I brought both of those up into this is because together they reveal the actions and the emotional structure of police impunity. When officers interrupt accountability as abandonment, you get a crisis of mission. The mindset, if we get charged, criticized, or examined, then nobody supports us. That's not what that action says. Accountability is not abandonment. It's the bare minimum condition of lawful power. If you're going to have arresting power, you also have a lawful means of doing it. Because a teacher can be disciplined. A doctor can be disciplined. A lawyer can be sanctioned. A judge can be reversed. A prosecutor can be disbarred. And again, a citizen can be arrested if it's done properly. And some people still want police criticism treated as taboo. That's not professionalism. That's exceptionalism. And exceptionalism is where abuse goes to hide. Now, you also heard me talk about the famous case, Jordan v. City of New London. And I speak about how police officers are in that low IQ range, 107 and lower. Because if you score too high, you're not hired. Right? Let's say you don't like the way I said that. Okay, cool. You don't need pseudo-psychology. Let's take out the low IQ statements that I made. Okay. I can show documents of bad training because, again, whenever a police officer's actions are called into question, go back and look at reports. What's the first thing they say? Oh, we went back and retrained him. We went back and retrained her. Why? Because they're pointing out that they are not trained properly. When I talked about quotes, because you can document the bad quotes or bad incentives. Why? Because quotas does exist. Again, I love to go back and talk about Trevor Noah. He spoke about quotas not everywhere like I did. He spoke about New York, where he was living at. Let's talk about the false reports. How often do we read those? How often do we see videos on YouTube about them? How often are those reports put out? I'm looking at least 10 to 15 a day. Let's talk about the unlawful searches. The CW Police 24/7 shows it to you all the time. All you gotta do is watch any episode. Excessive force. That is literally a daily occurrence. Why? Because none of them understand the context of law or how force is supposed to work. Let's talk about the policy violations. I actually did the police officers down in Dallas. I actually read it off. Why? Because most of them are online. You can pull them up. And let's talk about the police protect or the union protected recidivism, right? We've got 3 union presidents right now that are going to prison for covering up bad police actions. And the qualified immunity bearers, ignorance and willful actions. We're literally watching qualified immunity drop off cases on a daily basis. I don't have to talk about the IQ. It shows up in everything that I'm speaking about. So whether I say it or I show it, do you receive it? Because again, you don't ever have to take my word. It's right in front of you. Unless blissful ignorance is where you stay. And you pretending to be asleep helps you sleep better. Now, I went into a few other things. But one of the things I spoke about again with the CW is the welfare check. A welfare check is supposed to be care in motion, a response to possible vulnerability, a moment where public authority arrives, ideally, to preserve life. Fort Worth, Athena Davis. Excuse me, I said Athena Davis. I don't even know where that came from. Atatiana Johnson, Jefferson, God dang it. Atatiana Jefferson, there we go. Her neighbor saw that she had people at her house. I believe it was like 1 in the morning. All the people were gone, her front door was wide open. He called the non-emergency line for a welfare check. Police officers pull up. No sirens on. They park down the street. They walk up. They don't knock on the door. They stick a gun through the window and shoot Athena. They shoot her in front of her grandchild. Through a window. On a welfare check. Remember I spoke about the CW. The young lady was there for a welfare check. She then creates a crime to arrest this man. Let's go back to New York. Walter Chamberlain, Sr. Police officers was called to his house for a welfare check. If he doesn't get on the phone with his life alert people and they record his execution, police get away with a lie. Oh, we were there peacefully. On the recording, you can hear them cussing out tenants and threatening them. He says he doesn't need help. He's fine, he's responsive. Not only do they kick open his door, they throw him on the floor and they shoot him with a beanbag in the chest, who was also a 60-plus-year-old man at the time, and then shoot him on his back with a beanbag standing over him for a welfare check. I did that because it exposes structural issues. When armed enforcement is the default response to human vulnerability, tragedy is not an accident. It's a foreseeable design flaw. Now, the transcript includes a very specific anecdote about a woman who defended police until officers allegedly kicked in her door during a wellness check, triggered by her ex, who claimed she had a gun. Remember I told you that was a friend of mine. Back to blue until it happens to you. Be blissfully ignorant until. Because again, even in this context, the larger pattern is documented enough to make the point. The public is repeatedly told, call police for help. And yet too often, communities have seen help arise as command presence, weapon-ready escalation, or tactical intrusion. That contradiction is what destroys public confidence. And once that happens, citizens stop seeing the state as guardian. They start interpreting that as predictable force. That's not public safety, and that's public estrangement. Now, the moral center of this episode, why blissful ignorance is dangerous to everyone. Because constitutional erosion never begins with everybody. It begins with one person. Someone inconvenient, someone accused, someone disfavored, someone poor, someone isolated, someone easy to dismiss. And the public says that's their problem. Until it's not. That is the historical rhythm of failed vigilance. Once a society decides that law can bend whenever the target is unpopular, there is no longer a shield. It becomes a mood ring. Today it's a traffic stop. Tomorrow it's a search warrant. Then it's an asset seizure. It's a no-knock violence. It's retaliatory charging. It's selective prosecution. Fabricated probable cause is the court telling you the violation happened, but there is no remedy. That's how rights die. Not in one explosion and 1,000 excuses. Every excuse says, just this once. Probably justified. There must be more to the story. They were scared. The suspect was not perfect. That's 1 second. And that's the lullaby that you sleep with. The people sing it often think they're defending stability. They're not. They're normalizing impunity. Because most people do not wake up because they heard a brilliant legal argument. They wake up because reality finally collects its debt. They get stopped. They get lied on. They watch body cam. They file a complaint and nothing happens. They learn what probable cause actually means. They discover how hard civil rights litigation really is. They find out qualified immunity is not a slogan, but a barrier. They realize internal investigations can be little more than reputation management. Because piranha don't eat piranha. They learn that some reports are written not to describe events, but to relieve litigation. Then the conversation shifts. It's not mythical, it's mechanical. A person who once said, I'm not sure the officer had a reason, Or they say, I'm sure the officer had a reason. They then start asking, why is the report different from the video? Person who once said, police would never do that. They start asking, how many times have the police done that? That is the wake-up moment. You start asking better questions. And people cannot be taught before pain. Because the brain remembers two things: pleasure and pain. And until you receive that pain, you can never accept the change. And the tragic part is that is the realization of this episode. Some people need proximity to understand principle. That's why storytelling matters. That's why legal education matters. That's why public breakdowns matter. That's why supreme decisions matter. Because every person I teach before the machine reaches them is one less citizen available to excuse abuse to relax. Now, got a couple other things that I want to talk about, but we're not going to do it today. Because what we're going to do now is I'm going to keep it simple. There's a reason that sentence stayed with me. You can't wake a person pretending to be asleep, because it exposes the quiet corruption beneath public denial. Not ignorance, but performance. Not confusion, but protection. Not lack of evidence, but refusal to reckon. And yes, I'm country. And once you understand that, everything changes. You stop wasting your energy trying to overwhelm deliberate blindness with one more fact, one more video, one more case citation, one more headline, one more act of patience for people who are not searching for the truth in the first place. You realize some people are not convinced. They're already invested, but with someone else. They're invested in a fantasy that power behaves because power says it behaves. They're invested in the comfort of believing uniforms clean the soul. They're invested in the bedtime stories that authority and morality are twins. But law does not work that way. Law, when it's honest, begins with suspicion of concentrated power. This is why constitutions exist. This is why warrants exist. This is why suppression exists. This is why cross-examination and confrontation exist. This is why civil rights lawsuits exist. Because the framers of power always promise necessity. The victims of power are the ones forced to prove abuse. That's the ugly design. Remember, I talked about the architecture of the matrix. And that's why blissful ignorance is not merely personal weakness. It's a public hazard. It gives cover to misconduct. It buys time for lies. It isolates victims. It turns obvious warnings into background noise. And then one day, that same person who clapped for the machine discovered the machine has no loyalty to you. And this is why the lesson comes late. And so here's the change. Do not be the person pretending to be asleep. Do not defend what you have not examined. Do not excuse the Constitution forbids. Do not excuse distress for legality. Do not confuse sentimentalism for proof. Do not confuse authority with integrity. Wake up on purpose. Study the law. Watch the patterns. Test the narratives. Interrogate the reports. Read the actual cases. Name the contradictions. Because a free people cannot afford to be emotionally dependent on institutions they refuse to examine. I'm going to say that one more time. Free people cannot afford to be emotionally dependent on institutions they refuse to examine. And if a society ever reaches the point where questioning force is treated as treason, then understand this clearly. The danger is no longer the critic. The danger is the sleepwalker who chooses the dark. This is the Supreme Decisions Legal Minute Podcast, and the next move, as always, is yours. And I'm out.